Thanks, Scott. So I'm going to try to speak loudly enough without bending over. Can everybody in the back hear me? Yes, I see the thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, well, I just want to say thanks to ARC for inviting me to speak here today, that I will tell you this is a topic near and dear to my heart. As he mentioned, I'm the other end of the spectrum. As of February 1st, I'm a newcomer to the retired ranks, but I'm after working more than 32 years with ExxonMobil. One of the themes through the various jobs I had, whether it was in research, engineering, manufacturing, supply, biomedical sciences. My final position was the global manager of process engineering and optimization. One element was always key, that your organization was only as good as your people, your technology was only as innovative as your people's minds, and the motivation that they brought to the workforce. And so I got to tell you, a lot of people worry about when my generation with gray hair retires, what are we going to do? Well, after hearing from these three folks here, I'm not worried at all. I know we're in good hands. I just want to share with me and thanking them for their comments. Really nice job. So I'm here to provide the perspective from the other side. And to tell you the truth, I think the best thing, and I'm going to do a little bit of pretend it's 11 days ago and I'm still working. The best thing that I think we as employers can do is listen to our people. Okay, the feedback that we just heard here is fantastic. And if we listen to it, we take it to heart, we think open-mindedly, and we don't just look through the lens of what did I experience when I was 23, 25, 35, etc., then I think we're all going to do fine. But I think some of our biggest challenges are we all have our own paradigms. I think there was a couple comments. You don't know what you don't know. Also, you're very comfortable with what you do know. And I think what I'd like to do is to talk about the whole onboarding training process. And from a company perspective, what are we trying to do? We're trying to bring employees in, whether they're new hires or campus hires, and introduce them to the company culture. We'll talk about that in a minute. Also, you want to understand, is this person a good fit? ExxonMobil and a couple of companies you've heard for, we are long-term personnel investors. We hire the best and brightest, we look to train them, and from a mercenary standpoint, you want to get your payback, and or you want to retain, and the way you do that is having happy, fulfilled people. And I think we got a lot of good impact or feedback around that. And then the other is, you want to make sure that your folks start out and get a good technical and business foundation, but also, we heard the word already, leader. To be a successful leader, whether you're a supervisor, a manager, or a technical leader, there's all those soft skills that are the hard ones to develop. And so we'll actually talk about the various aspects of that. Today's focus is not around the various generations at work, but I think a little bit of background is helpful to put in context where are our paradigms and why do we want to blend them together. We hear a lot about the World War II generation, the baby boomers, Generation X, Y, millennials. Well, as I was doing some research, now that I'm not just ExxonMobil, I wanted to give you a broader perspective than just what I've experienced. And so doing some reading, I actually liked there were two quote-unquote categories that I found actually pretty self-explanatory. One, if you were born before 1980, you're probably a cowboy. Okay, what do you mean by that? You're very individually oriented, very proud of what's going on, and so that's oftentimes characterizes how you think, how you behave, what you expect. Well, you take the next generation, and their, if you will, characteristic is collaborators. Okay, a couple of the folks said, well, I'm a millennial, and so I guess I should talk about me. Well, the reality is you go into the psych books, you go into the education books, you go into the National Academy of Science, okay, and the generation that's 20% of the workforce today and will be 40% of the workforce in 2020, 5 years from now, okay, are the best collaborators that any of us have experienced. And it comes very naturally. And we think about the type of work we do in our businesses, whether we're engineers, whether we're scientists, whether we're computer scientists, mathematicians, very rarely can something be done by one person alone. And so my generation, we got our technical training and we all went to these courses to learn how to work as a team. I would tell you that the folks coming out of school today could teach us all, okay, if we knew to listen and we knew to act. So I think one of the things from an employer perspective, yes, we have our own experiences, but let's take advantage of the natural collaboration skills that our current employees coming in bring to the table. And I think what's also really cool, and we've heard it from some of the folks, is this generation's continuous learner. Okay, how many people in this room have learned 4, 5, 6 different word processing languages as they grew up in their careers? How many of you thought of them as a pain in the butt? Okay, well today apps are changing every 6 months, and if you're in the process control industry right now, Microsoft is driving us all nuts because they keep changing versions and we like to standardize when we're industry, right? Well, the generation coming in today is used to change, and actually instead of us thinking that they get bored if things don't change, let's think of that it is adaptable and ready, not threatened, not intimidated by it. And I think, especially when we think in the automation industry, the fact that vendors are changing, hardware's changing, most of our hardware is obsolete, or going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. And so the need for change and the need to understand is very real. And we've got people walking in the door every day by the tens and the hundreds that could teach us how to do that. So I think the willingness to adapt, the non-intimidation with change and the new technology is a real attribute that can come along. I think the other thing also is that in my generation, if you looked at who went to college, it was pretty homogeneous. It was white, it was male, it was American, okay? And there were a couple non-whites, a couple non-Americans, a couple non-males. If you look in the technical fields today, you look in the universities today, and we've got everything there. And so this generation that's coming in, diversity, yeah, fine, we're all different. Next, inclusion. Truly creating an environment where people want to be valued for their differences, want to bring them together to provide a more balanced perspective can be very, very powerful. And so as, you know, Alyssa, Tim, and Tyler told us, they want to be respected as individuals. As businesses, the reality is the workforce is diverse. And if we can all figure out how to make that an inclusive workforce, then it can be very successful. And I know there's been a number of companies, ExxonMobil, we've been working hard at turning diversity into inclusion and success. We've got some affinity groups that are your typical diversity focus, whether it's gender, culture, background. We also have one for younger employees. J&J also has put together an effort like that. GE brought together a group of 20 plus or minus younger employees to define what are companies looking for today, or what are employees looking for today. And they have influenced both ExxonMobil, J&J, and GE. And I just use them illustratively. I'm sure there's many more, that the onboarding training is morphing to be more E-enabled and to be more just in time. The performance management, more transparent. I heard those words. The metrics and the expectations are becoming more visible. It's not just managers go into a room for 3 days, once a year, come out, the white cloud, the black cloud, the big raises, the small raises, but it's ongoing. And so I think that's, you know, something that we can work from. One of the things that we saw at ExxonMobil, and I know we were talking about it before lunch with a couple of the other gentlemen in the room, is we talk a lot about preparing our supervisors to support a good environment. We talk about preparing our managers, and that's where a lot of the soft training oftentimes occurs. Well, the reality is a lot of the companies in this room have strong technical ladders, expect from their technical leaders, and I will admit, we held ourselves up to the mirror about 5 years ago, and we weren't preparing our technical experts to be technical leaders the way we were supporting our supervisory futures to be supervisory leaders. And so we talk about these interpersonal skills that are kind of soft, and soft things typically get second shift versus hard things get first. But the reality is, to be a technical leader in today's world, multiple cultures, multiple countries, multiple disciplines, you need to know how to communicate, you need to know how to influence without authority, and you need to know how to have a strong background. You know, we've got a process control engineer, fast forward now, you know, Tyler, 20 years from now, you're going to be sitting there and you're going to be taking on a plant manager and you're going to tell him or her that you've got a high vulnerability, cybersecurity, topic next door, okay, the risk is high, we haven't done anything, and I need you to listen to me. Okay, so yes, he's going to go in with technically correct calculations and a very good risk assessment, but he needs to get that manager's attention in a way that actually gets a response, not just another report to read later. So the inclusion of interpersonal skills and communication skills and influencing skills earlier on in a technical individual's career, in addition to a manager's career, I think is really important. If we think a little bit about, so I think from the onboarding standpoint, make sure it's well-rounded, make sure, and I think actually Tim said it the best, and we've learned also, if we're not careful, onboarding can be all about, this is what the company brings to you. Well, the reality is they are the future of the company, so we need to seek feedback. Somehow there needs to be a continuous improvement process. A number of the companies that I mentioned seek input from their employee groups and their onboarding, their mentoring, their buddy systems. 5 years ago, one of the buddies got reassigned 2 weeks after a new person started. This person didn't have a buddy. And so people are wondering, 4 weeks into the internship, why they didn't know how to do things, found out that they weren't getting supported. So I think as companies, if we continuously seek feedback, both formally and informally, we don't have to be perfect the first time, but we'll get better and better and better, and those gaps will be shorter in duration. So now we talk about assessing employees' strengths. We talked about the technical foundations, and I think right now we're sort of going through a transformation in that. We want to make sure, does a person have the right technical background? Do they have the right education? And I think most companies have their list of schools whose curriculums they trust and or experienced hires, that someone's already cut their teeth, they've got some experience. And so I will admit for our company, because that's a pretty well-honed process, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think once the person comes in the door, that transparency, what are the expectations, both technical, both behavioral, both interpersonal, how do you navigate the system? So having technical mentors in addition to buddies, who's that safe person you can go to? Okay, you can get the real skinny and they're not going to run around and tell your supervisor what the quote, dumb or naive or less informed questions are. That balance is really important. I think we talked about when you give feedback, the balance of feedback as an individual and feedback as an individual participating in a team. I know in our company, ExxonMobil, we are very much a pay for performance, and I will tell you we have a reputation for having very high standards, true, but it's not at the expense of the team. And so there are ways to balance individual capabilities and team performance and still give good feedback, and I would just challenge all of us as employers to really think hard, are we striking the balance that we talk about as we actually behave and go through some of that? And I think the other piece on making sure there's strong technical foundation and assessing a person's goodness of fit is, again, don't just spend all the time focusing on the supervisor. Make sure you're supporting that technical mentor, that technical leader as well, because oftentimes they're actually the face to the company for the first year, maybe first 2 years, depending on the experience. I think there's some other areas that are coming in. We hear a lot about simulator training, and that's become very popular and very effective on the operator side of things. As we're turning over that population, well, I know later on this week, Richard Turton from University of West Virginia will be talking, and there's been some work where, how about simulators for engineers in virtual reality? We talk about accelerating the learning, we talk about getting people more comfortable on plants. I mean, Tim's already been to 3 and he's been with, his company 9 months. Many folks, it's not until after the first year, once you cut your teeth. Well, wouldn't it be nice that the first time the person went in the plant, they already had a visualization of what pipe racks look like, what vessels are like, how everything fits together. That doesn't have to be real, it can be virtual. And as companies, have we really taken full advantage of that? I would suggest we think about it. I think the other aspect that's becoming more and more relevant, if you will, is long distance learning. A couple years ago, we started a low-cost, high-value engineering office in Kuala Lumpur. Most of our engineers and our experts were in Virginia. Okay, and so what do you do with that? You've got distance, you've got culture, and so you start getting into your long distance, your video cameras, your social media, etc. But I got to tell you, who should be, especially if you're 12 hours off, who should be the one on the phone at 10 p.m. or at 6 a.m.? And are our leaders and our employees sharing that? I mean, are we truly telling people that they're included as part of the company, or they have to conform to where the focus is. So I think those are some aspects to work with. I think something else, there's two things that are sort of related to this whole training and skills assessment. And one of them, multitasking. Okay, how many people in here think they're good multitaskers? Okay. What, if you were a psychologist and you actually looked at it, a psychologist would tell you to be effective in multitasking, okay, two things have to be in place. Number one of the tasks you're doing is so automatic or so mindless that you can do it in your sleep and not worry about it safely, okay? Or the other combination is that you're doing two things and different parts of the brain are engaged. So I'm reading an article, I'm doing my homework, and I'm listening to music without lyrics. The minute you turn the lyrics on, same side of the brain, okay? And I know I went home one night and our company has multiple training and mechanisms to ensure that employees are aware of cybersecurity risks. You know, phishing, right? PH phishing as opposed to F phishing. Well, I know one day I was sitting at my desk and I had a telecon coming out of my phone, so I had the phone on mute, and I was way behind on email, as most of us are, and so I'm banging through this email with all the mindless stuff, and oh, by the way, our internal little drill caught me on a fishing expedition. And I was like, oh man, I knew that email didn't look quite right, but I just wanted to get rid of it so I could feel good because my inbox was smaller. That to me was a very personal example of, I thought I could listen, even though I wasn't actively engaged, and read mindless email, and had that been real, that could have been serious consequences. And so what the psychologist will tell us is most of the time, we're not doing multitasking, we're doing serial tasking. We start, stop, start, stop. Well, when you start, stop, your productivity goes to about, there's a 40% hit versus what you would have been doing if you did this for an hour, then that for an hour, etc. So my comment to us as employers and as some of our young employees, we have to be really careful about what we think can be done with multitasking, what we think is effective. And oh, by the way, what was it? The National Academy of Science did a study, so leave the soft psych side, go back to the hardcore science. The worst offenders of ineffective multitasking were those that assessed themselves as the best. Okay? So not only is it as good, but typically those that think they're the best actually, when they did a self-assessment, then were actually evaluated, were some of the worst. So right now, the reason why I sort of bring this up, we talk about multitasking. I mean, I have an iPhone and an iPad and a computer, blah, 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 but we all need to focus. And when you think about the automation area, process control, what we're doing, we can't afford to not be fully engaged when we're doing technical things. So a little bit of a plea to all of us from 23 to 63 and beyond, when it's time to focus, focus. And when you need to do something deep, really think about what you're doing it and are you giving it your best, because especially when some of our controls leads to process safety, or some of our controls leads to cybersecurity, the consequences of us not being fully engaged are significant. So not to preach, but I just thought I'd share that one in there. Okay? And then the other comment I wanted to bring in about training. We talk a lot about making sure that our less than 10 years, 10 to 15 year part of the population gets good training. Well, wait a second. The people who are retiring, 30 plus years, if we're not broad thinkers, we focus on the first 10 to 15, well, what about the 15 in the middle? Okay, and you don't want your mid-career folks to be forgotten or to not be supported as well. And actually, we're retiring, and who's behind us? All those people that weren't hired. I mean, back in the 90s and 2000s, companies were still downsizing, they were right-sizing, and so I know our company and many others, the demographic curve, high retiring, dip in the middle, high hiring. And so one of the other things we all need to make sure is that we focus on our mid-career. And that's where you take your experts and turn them into leaders. That's where you take your supervisors and turn them into managers. And I will admit, a couple years ago, when we had updated our technical development process, etc., we had an unintended backlash from our mid-career folks. And they said, wait, what about me? Okay, you know, you need about 5 times as many of me as you've got, but yet I'm not hearing you talk about me. And it wasn't that we weren't talking, but we were still thinking. So again, just as employers, we need to be really careful that we don't want to work on the two tails and forget actually the next 10 years, those people have already been in the company 15, 20 years, or at other companies, and you're bringing them in. And so make sure. And the way you train and augment those mid-career skills is very different than oftentimes some of the younger ones. Some of the experience we've had at ExxonMobil, and as I did my little research, other companies also, you're getting more into holistic thinking. Instead of how do I calculate and how do I assess, it's more of how do I approach. Okay, and so there's a couple different buzzwords. There's enhanced knowledge transfer is something that SWRI uses as a phrase. Cognitive task analysis is a phrase that scientific knowledge uses and others. But basically it's a concept of, okay, you've got all your engineering fundamentals and all your skills. Now how do you package it to influence? How do you approach a non-black and white problem? And we've found putting experienced folks with mid-career folks together and looking at how do you solve things holistically can be very, very powerful. And it was interesting, I was talking to one of our senior technical leaders that was in the group. I said, so how'd it go? How'd it feel? Because basically you got a facilitator and we did one-on-one interviews. And he said, you know what? This is what we used to do when I was a younger engineer, when there were 4 or 5 of us that would go on a plant trip together. You know, you'd work in the plant during the day, then you'd go to the bar or the restaurant at night, and you'd tell stories, and you'd talk about those non-black and white situations. Well, we're also lean, we're also focused, and so there's very few opportunities for those social engagements where you learn how to do the job. So I just offer as guidance, don't forget your middle, because your middle is, okay, who's going to be leading the company in the next 3 to 10 years, and they got some, yes, they got some big shoes to fill, but also they're probably doing it at a younger age than their predecessors. And so I think balancing that is just something, and there's a number of different papers and talks, and we'll do the panel. I'll be willing to share, because I think that's unique, and I think a lot of companies are working on the front end. I'm not sure that many are working on the middle. So I think if we step back and bring this all to conclusion, when we're considering training and development, the collaboration generation is a tremendous opportunity. Okay, yes, you know, we look to share our experiences, but we have a lot to learn ourselves. And so I think if it's a two-way street, it's really good. Support the training of all employees to understand diversity and turn it into inclusion. How do you think? How do you behave? How do you make decisions? How do you communicate? Where'd you come from? Little town, big town, you know, et cetera. Because once we understand our differences and how they influence we behave, then we can start leveraging it and truly adding significant value. And as I mentioned, 20% of the workforce is our colleagues right here. They're going to be 40% of the workforce in 5 years. This is not just something that's nice. This is a business imperative. And so inclusion, I think, is a key enabler. We talked about soft skills training. Soft skills aren't easy. And most of us engineer and scientists, what's our Myers-Briggs profile? What is INTJ? I, that's not an extrovert. J, that's not open-minded. T, okay, we need the T. So for us to be leaders and for us to be influencers and for us to be open-minded, a lot of that undoes our first 22, 25, 30 years of experience and exposure. And so how do we augment that strong technical and expand so we can be successful both on the technical side and the supervisory side? We talked about not limiting training to just the new employees, all employees, I think will be really important. And then I think the other, and just in closing, is let's continue to foster an environment of inclusion, valuing others, and bringing all our thoughts to the table. Because when we do, we're respected, we want to participate. As employers, we win. As employees, we win. And it's a fun day, and we want to come back and do it again tomorrow. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll turn it back over to Scott. Thanks.